guys, welcome back to Out of Band. My name is Jennifer Wennekers, and as you guys can see, I have a bit of a different setup today. Faith is out of office. She is enjoying some personal time, and I have a new co-host with me, Dimple.
Hi, I'm Dimple, and nice to meet you all.
Perfect. Thanks, Dimple. Happy to have you here. And today we have a very special guest. His name is Gert-Jan Bruggink. And Gert-Jan, take the floor. Introduce yourself.
Hi. Let's break the ice correctly, right?
Exactly. Not awkward at all.
Good stuff. So Jennifer, what do you want to know about me?
So who are you? What are you doing? What do you do in cybersecurity?
Awesome. So first of all, thanks for even inviting me and being here. I think my story is in a way quite simple. Mm-hmm. Beforehand, we prepared this session, and one of the questions you asked me to obviously also look into is, what is my background? How did I got into cyber threat intelligence? What I found is start by doing. One of the first things I did when I exited the technical university is to look at, hey, where can I get the most experience, and where is that even possible? And at the time, some of my friends, they started in just consultancy teams at certain Dutch vendors. I was like, no, man, I don't know shit. So, let's start with some engineering work first. And that set me off on a pretty interesting journey where you kind of learn the ropes first. Mm-hmm. And, how do you implement a firewall? Well, to implement a firewall, you have to know network engineering. You have to know how protocols work, how network traffic in essence work, how basically everything works. Then move over to authentication products. And then you learn how authentication works, how Active Directory works, how that all ties together. And that basically set me up for a bit more my knees in the mud, so to say.
Down the rabbit hole.
Exactly, down the rabbit hole, and spending a good amount of time in that, falling over multiple times, 100%, but also learning a lot of that. During that period, I also had a good relationship with a couple of people, mm-hmm. and they really helped me and supported me, mentoring me through everything I went through. And that was it was just a wild experience. And for all of you watching, I mean, the only thing I can recommend to people is to start with in the mud, do the works, and then it may seem like not fun in the beginning, but it will surely pay out in the end.
That's for sure. It will gain you practice. Yeah. A lot of additional insights.
Exactly.
Take where the path takes, go where the path takes you.
So background. What are you doing nowadays?
Yeah, when I was done basically with the security engineering stuff, I did move into the consulting stuff because it fitted. It turned out that it fitted my personality, my ambition, my profile. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up with a Big Four team, Big Four company, and basically doing advisory work on how to set up a security program, how to do security projects, basically in the broadest sense of the word. But through all that period, I've seen small companies become really big at the time. For example, there was a small company, a Swedish company, still at the time, they were really small. They collected open source information about everything, and they put that into pretty interesting reports. And I found that, like, why isn't everyone using that kind of information to steer their own decision-making process? Why are these solutions being implemented? Why is that? Why do people choose for a solution X or Y or Z? So I found that question more interesting, and that actually also led me away from the engineering side and more of the risk focused way. And how do you organize that whole stuff?
Yeah.
Getting it done was basically one of the things I love to do and get the most satisfaction out of. And that is what I got to do at that Big Four company. And that small company, by the way, that was called Recorded Future. And obviously right now it's pretty big.
Not a small company anymore.
Exactly. But you know, it did set me up for some interesting career pivots, so to say, because it did got me into like, how does a decision-making process in a company actually work, and how is that informed? And you kind of see that, especially in the cyber domain, there's a lot of, you know, different narratives. Yeah, and I was kind of interested in how do we center that? How do we center that discussion, if you will? So at a certain point in time, I got, and that was already in 2014 after the APT1 report got dropped by Mandiant. That actually spurred an entire industry, obviously, or at least an industry that was already there, but not as specifically as it was at the time. But that did got me thinking, like, hey, this is an interesting field. I'd like to specialize in that because it aligns with what I'm doing. And my contribution to that is that I'm able to look at it from the technical side, but also able to organize the entire program and operation around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so after a good amount of years into consulting, I basically developed into a, you know, long story short, a threat assessment and scenario-based defense subject matter expert. Basically, the guy who you should talk to when you need this kind of services, products, information, deliverables, whatever. And we were doing that all across the world. And even to this day, I'm doing that now for my own company, Venation. But the idea is still the same, except I basically now productize the threat modeling side into threat scenarios, if you will. Which help teams now produce their own risk content, threat content, whatever they need. But it's always going back to that logic of, hey, how can we make better decisions, and how can we make more smarter investments that cover actual stuff? And an interesting angle I still see to this day in the entire cyber and also the intelligence industry, cyber threat intelligence industry, yeah, is that we're constantly busy with, you know, more details, more details. But the conversations I have with a lot of my clients is actually doesn't start with the details. They start with, shut up, Bruggink. We need one row summary, and then we need to move into those details. And I think that is a pretty interesting trend, and not a lot of companies tie onto that because of reasons.
No, and that's also what I see. Like, if you think of cyber threat intelligence, or threat intelligence as it's more nowadays called, the first thing that people think of is, oh, IOCs, we need that kind of a detail, which is indeed what you need to be able to take action upon it. But it doesn't necessarily immediately provide the type of information that you need to make those risks-based decisions and see what is really relevant for your company. You can drown basically in IOCs, but it will not necessarily immediately be relevant for you.
Exactly. I think the essence of the discussion, at least which is not often discussed, is that, you know, the concept of intelligence is as old as human beings. You know, we've been doing this since we were in the Stone Age, basically. People were always spying on each other, listening to each other. But you kind of see a trend now where there's an emphasis on the cyber element, like that is the fundamental thing that's happening. But to be honest, you know, it's not really that. It's like, it's more, what we see now is that everything is more cyber enabled. Where in the past it was more physically enabled, because we still have people doing stuff to other people. And that will continue to go on like that for as long as there are people. So there will always be people interested in gaining money over the backs of others, and they will resorted to physical things. They resorted to paper fraud, or they now move into cyber, where they will now, like, for as long as there is an internet connection, they see that as a means to an end. Yeah. And that will continue to happen. And I strongly believe that people who are on the ball and identify these new methods, including AI or whatever, just keep an eye on that, and it will be part of that attack chain you will see.
I think those are really good points, because what you do notice in the wild in like in the organizations, in the clients that you work with, people tend to focus on indeed the technologies, but in the end, there's always a human behind it. There's always a human actor that is performing these type of attacks, that is targeting those organizations or industries, for example. So that's extremely valuable.
Fascinating. A good example, not a fascinating example, but a good example of that is the obviously people, it's much easier to explain a technical story of what you've seen and what evidence you have, rather than explaining how 6 individuals which are 16-year-old and live in Brazil, how they compromised your multi-million-dollar program.
That's kind of to admit.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to explain it, right? So it also has to do with storytelling, if you ask me. And I wouldn't say controversial, but my opinion is that the cybersecurity industry is not really good at storytelling, and we continue to do so. And I think that needs to change.
Yeah.
And how I contribute to that, at least, is, and obviously I won't go into like a commercial pitch or that kind of stuff, but what I do think is what we're not talking much about is how things work sequentially. Second, being able to articulate not just the details, but being able to summarize it to the exact audience you see. Mm-hmm. That is a pretty nuanced statement, obviously. It makes a lot of sense, right? To explain everything in a couple sentences. No, it does not.
No, and it's very different as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it actually is a trait. Yeah, and I find that these two elements, every engagement I come in, I see teams struggle with this all the time, and that is, in a sense, people are not educated to that. People are not educated to summarize information correctly, and AI can help on that. I'm not saying jump on the AI bandwagon, but there's, for example, some good examples out there on how you can use that kind of tool in your own workflow as a step to simplify your message, to train yourself how to message something to an executive vice president. Those conversations are way different than how do you brief your peers, for example. But one example. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, so I was just thinking along the lines of like you're very specifically emphasizing here, for example, how you communicate, so how you bring across the message, but isn't it also partially about how you receive the message? So if you're able to interpret what the actual question of the stakeholder is.
Exactly.
And it's also about different perspective, how you receive what other person is saying, or how you feel about it.
But this, I think you both make exactly the point, right? That is what that is correct, but that is not always what's happening. Because of time constraints, yes, we never asked the question of, did you actually understand the report I send you?
Yeah.
Do
you have some feedback points for me?
Yeah. Never asked.
These are like, I'm not trying to kick in the open doors, but all I'm saying is like this is the stuff where, like, these fundamental things where you think like, what makes up a good team? What makes up a good team? Like, they do these basic stuff structurally correct.
Yeah.
They do it consistently, and they measure it, they improve on that. But to get there, that takes time and dedication. It's not just about that one motivated or talented or bright individual, because, and that's what you, for example, also see in certain sport events, right, where there are all different people, and you have a couple of them that run really fast, but in the end you end up with being as fast as your slowest person. And that is, I'd like to use that analogy as well for high performance teams or performance teams within cyber threat intelligence, and maybe even cyber. Like, if you have one bright analyst and you're not able to use their knowledge to bring the others up, I'm not saying to put that person down, but you have to be really you have to be able to lift the entire tide to that.
Yeah.
And we sometimes we don't have time for that. Sometimes we don't have budget to that. So, or priority, most importantly.
I think it's indeed also
What?
partially the focus of an organization, because if you, for example, look through, I don't know, vacancies, like job positions, the description of what cyber threat intelligence analyst needs to have as qualities, as requirements, usually the focus, the emphasis is on the technical skills. They're able to work with a tool A, B, or C. They're supposed to be able to work with protocol X, Y, Z, etc. But this soft skills, core skills, how people nowadays also call them, there's not a lot of focus or attention on them.
Yeah, amen to that. And it should. No, I mean, in the end, so a bit of a trip down memory lane, right? So the field of intel as we know it, if you look at the definition and how it started, the idea is that we have incidents, we do forensic investigation, we see artifacts in the network, in the host, in anywhere.
Yep.
We make a good picture out of that. We basically reassemble that picture, and then you get a story of basically how somebody did something, just like any burglar would in a physical house.
Yeah.
We apply the same logic, but in a cyber context. Now, if you look at how the intelligence angle came into that, is because if we would apply that cyber understanding, then we could do the same thing as we do in the physical world and do intelligence on it. Now, if you would ask me, like, what is the definition of cyber intelligence, I think it differs. It differs greatly from the audience you're talking to, right? There are multiple ones, but what I do think is that every team needs to define it on their own. I can come up with one thing, and even within this group, we can come up with 3 things, and they're probably all like 90% the same. But I encourage teams to actually spend some time with what does that mean for us? You know, we're doing this stuff, but what does it mean? Did we copy it from Gartner? Did we copy it from Wikipedia? Did we copy it from Gert-Jan or from Jennifer or from Dimple? I don't know. But you know, this is sometimes funny, like this is sometimes from one of those stuff where you think like it's so obvious, but have you ever documented this? And then they're like, no, but that's why it's inconsistent across your organization.
Yeah.
And you know, this is exactly some of the stuff I help all my clients with, to structure like these basics, help them build the foundation of their CTI program, and then help them how to build up towards these more ambitious goals, like training your analysts in soft skills. How do you do that? Yeah, okay. That is step 2, right? Just make sure that you do the basics first. And then, yeah.
So you're telling about perspectives on like threat intel. So I would love to know about your perspective. You know, what is a good threat intel for you? What would you consider a strong intel, and when would you tell that intel has aged or that information is no longer valid?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because the success of a Intel product defines on your own definition of success, if you ask me. So one of the things, for example, I actually do is like ask the teams, when are you successful? When we publish this amount of report. What? How do you know how many reports it is? How do you structure them? What is in there? How do you tie that into, for who do you produce? What audience do you produce for? So there's like layers on how you can define success. That's what I'm getting at. But for me, I'm a process thinker. So I usually look at, is one deliverable better than the next one, or the previous one, to be precise? Because then you can see that a team learns, grows, improves over time. And that is usually a better indicator of report quality overall than if a report one-off was written by 15 people over a span of 6 months. I find it more interesting on if regular updates get better over time. And a good example on that is actually if you, for you or for maybe also some of the listeners, if you look at some of the briefings coming out of the NCC or CISA, these are pretty well written, and they do it pretty often.
Yep.
But if you analyze them, which I did, on a textual level, they're also pretty well written, structured, to the point.
No.
A good exactly, no fluff. Also in terms of structuring, you leave a bit of context at the end, or details at the end. But also, like, it isn't not really, this is not about technical stuff or fluffy stuff, but it's like there's a certain purpose of that briefing that is being told quite quickly, and the rest of the document is structured correctly, and that helps me consume that information efficiently. And if I see that happening often and often and often, then I'm thinking, hey, this is pretty good. And that is what makes a good TI report on that. Now, if you would ask me what does not a good TI report or a TI deliverable look like, it is actually the same thing. But sometimes what you see, it's easy to point out, and you see that in some of the cyber threat intelligence trainings of one I also followed, is that it's you kind of want to show, like, this is a good example and this is a bad example. And funnily enough, historically, we did have some pretty bad ones. And then you can point to things like, we attributed that to a certain country in Asia. I'm not going to say which one right now, but that's the one. But there's like no evidence that even supports those claims. But I'd like to think, at least again, that's my perspective, I'd like to think that that is just poor analytical rigor and poor setting up of the whole environment to produce those reports, and say that individual thing was shitty, you know. But anyway, that's how I look at it. But that doesn't take away the fact that these kind of reports still get published often, and mostly in the marketing capacity. And the issue there, I think, and that to conclude this one, I think the issue there is mostly like marketing is still, we deliver a lot of content that resonates. And the issue to that is that it can sometimes also be used as, hey, we're informing people. And then we're informing people, it's good marketing content, and then we leave it at that. And then sometimes you have a pretty good report which gets QA'd by marketing or somebody, and then you get left with not the right message as you put it across. That is also one of the indicators, I think, what makes a bad TI.
Yeah, but unfortunately, sometimes it is like, hey, we did put out something, and hey, we do have a good reputation as a company for producing TI reports, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We shared with the community.
Yeah.
Another interesting angle to this discussion is also a thing I talked about this week. So
yeah.
This week I attended a NISA event in Athens.
Yeah.
That was basically precursored by a ad hoc working group, and the ad hoc working group focuses on cyber threat landscapes, and now NISA produces those. And this is one of the things I do a lot of volunteering work for, because I think that is important, that we get European messaging correctly, that we get nuancing correct, and I'm spending some time every month to get that done, helping them out any way I can. And what they then do with that is a second thing. But I think the essence is that this is my effort in making sure that the European information production on this topic is consistent.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we also discussed in that working group is that they sometimes face challenges, challenges such as how many data do we have, how much things we don't know, how much, how do you write that down, how do you deal with that? And what I'd like to bring at least to the attention is that it's actually okay to tell people or to write in your documents what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that is something that is pretty uncommon. If you would see that in a document or in a deliverable, I always think that's amazing, because that means that people actually thought about, hey, this is something useful, this is something valuable, because that's what they don't know. And more often than not, you see actually people coming back on that and saying, hey, instead of saying, hey, they're saying, hey, I actually have something for that. You might want to look at this.
But I think that's an attitude, because I think, for example, in mostly commercial situations, it can be extremely scary and sometimes even with legal repercussions to admit that you don't know something.
Exactly. Especially if you have a service contract that prohibits you or that says that you are the one who's supposed to do that. Otherwise, X amount of fine.
Yeah.
But regardless, you still have an opportunity to say the same thing, but maybe in different words.
True.
So it's also that's how you usually play around with the lawyers. But trust me, I've done so in the past. But the idea should be is that you be open and vulnerable, if you will, about what you know and what you don't know. And that is fundamental to a good and solid and trustworthy service provider. And regardless of what stood in the briefing, in the contract, these kind of things, that is what people need to hear. And especially when you're in an incident.
Yeah.
So we tend to think that this is all great and etc. And we need to spend like 14 weeks to publish a report about something that happened 50 weeks ago. But when it's incident time, it's more important to quickly understand what is it that we don't know.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes forgotten because and that's really valuable because then you as a starting or experienced or seasoned intel specialist or analyst in general, then you can quickly pivot through the information and say, hey, you know, the team of Jennifer or the team of Dimple, they know this and this and this. And I complement that with the stuff I know from Gert-Jan.
But it might also be that as an industry, we might need a shift in mindset because in the past, it has been an attitude of like, we get service from one company and they know everything and they're making sure that we're secure. Not one company doesn't know everything. So I think it also we need to have a mind shift in regards to like, okay, this company knows this company knows that. Let's combine it and make sure that we have the best overview for our current situation.
Yeah, you know, I'm a bit of a controversial thinker. I like to think that this the whole cybersecurity industry is like a bit crazy. I mean, it's like we are. In a sense, we are sometimes continuing to extend the problem. But the reality is that we face a problem that cannot be solved. If you would look at the actual fundamentals of everything we do every single day, and it's about humans. And the only way this would stop is if there are no human-to-human interactions anymore. But that will never happen, hopefully. Yeah. But I think that also brings to the point like, hey, if the cybersecurity industry is naturally incentivized to prolong certain things, then you will always see companies competing and you know, just being close to the chest in terms of what telemetry they have or what kind of research they do.
Yeah.
And I do have to, that is a negative thing to say or a negative outlook, but the positive outlook is that we've gotten way better at sharing our own materials. But to this day, I just want to add a critical note that to this day, we still struggle with the exact thing we share and how we share.
How do you mean?
Even, yeah, so what I mean by that is that even today, in the ENISA conversations, but also in conversations I have with, in the US, the Center for Threat Informed Defense, you still see discussions on how do you share actual data. And luckily, there are solutions for that. Privacy technology is happening; it's being built as we speak. There's solutions to these kind of problems, except it's not yet ingrained in the current organizations.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about what cyber threat intelligence is according to you. We've touched a little bit upon threat landscapes in threat-informed defense, what makes a good threat intelligence report and what makes a bad threat intelligence report. Maybe it's good to touch a little bit about how to actually use cyber threat intelligence for organizations for threat-informed defense, because it's a bit of a buzzword nowadays, I think.
Well, that is an understatement.
Let's keep it politically correct here.
Exactly. I think this is definitely an understatement. The current market is always looking at ways to package things up differently, but in this case, I actually think they're onto something. This obviously this phrase was coined many years ago by the cyber elders in some cave. No, I don't know where it actually got coined, but I like to think that the concept of threat informed defense has also been as long as those elders in that cave. Because basically you would have some kind of situation that would materialize and that would influence your decision making. But you know, for some reason in cyber, we are a bit slow to comprehend that logic, and then we sometimes think that we know better, and that we do not have to track exactly what people are doing and can move along. While in the physical world, we've been doing that same thing for a long time, you know. So there's a lesson to be learned there. I don't know which one, but for some people there sure is. But the concept of threat informed defense is real. It is just a manifestation of how you can position TI, in my opinion, a bit more central in your team.
Yeah.
And let it actually steer your decision-making process. Now, how to do that, that is a different story. And based on my experience of organizing programs, of organizing cyber fusion centers, of organizing SOCs or building CTI capabilities, what I've always found is that each individual team finds itself like super elite or super good, super well, but they always tend to function in different pillars.
Silos.
Silos, indeed. Sorry, but yeah, there's things you can say about that. You can say that's bad, but what is interesting is that you sometimes then create situations where you would have a pretty mature hunting team, or a pretty mature individual who's a SOC analyst who can do hunting. Maybe that's your structure, and who can do intel analyst as well, or maybe an incident response person who's also an intel analyst. Or I don't know. There's many flavors, but in the end, what matters is how they all communicate and work together. And again, maybe coming back to the comment we raised, that it's about communication with each other.
Yeah.
If you, for example, have a team doing incident response, then there's no, if they aren't talking with your intel team, then something is not right. If you have an intel team that's just producing content which isn't shared to anyone, except if somebody just asks it, then you can also say, like, this is the self-flicking ice cone. Some of my colleagues always refer to. Now, the same goes for detection engineering. If you want to have a good and solid lead pipeline, the same goes for threat hunting. On what you need to start with or what you need to focus on. You shouldn't just work on what the particular specialist or hero, if you will, was thinking of, or what he or she thinks that is the right thing to do. No, you have to, maybe you can work together and build a lead pipeline together.
Yeah.
That's, for example, something I'm doing now for a client, giving them a threat-informed lead pipeline, where the threat intelligence team on a daily basis looks at what is happening. They basically break down and make reports of single events, of reports or anything that gets processed. That out of that content, you basically get key takeaways or assessments. Assessments then get analyzed. But also if they see certain techniques being referenced in incident reports, they get flagged then for follow-up by the detection engineering team, or to see, is the detective controls or existing use cases still efficient? And that is a cross collaboration then with the threat hunting team to then see, hey, do we actually check this PowerShell thing? You know, yeah, we check PowerShell, but there's like a million ways to exploit this. So we do not exactly monitor on that. And then it's like a cross collaboration. That is threat informed.
So it's basically, how seamless your information flows within the team, and, how effective it is like used and built upon.
Yeah. And this 100% Dimple. And this is this works in the operational tactical space, where you have cyber fusion centers or teams working together. But the same logic applies also upwards to different organizational pillars. For example, physical security. I work with teams that do physical events, but now given that the threat is either cyber enabled or physically enabled and is actually moving towards that, you kind of have to want to get a good picture on every assessment you do on what the angle is. So case in point, if you do if you have an event in Canada or in China, those are two completely different nuances. If you have a report I live in the Netherlands, specifically Eindhoven, it's a bit different if you do an event in Eindhoven than you would do it in Amsterdam, for example. But, you know, in that event, what are some of the physical restraints we have? But what happens if we get inside? You know, can people actually physically access routers? Mm-hmm. Are the USB ports on these routers enabled? All that stuff, you know. My point is not to actually go into, we have to test that's beyond the point. But the thing is that you see that the trend is that it moves into the physical and then it moves through to the digital, and it's constant flow. And you cannot do that single-handedly in cyber, and that's where it always goes wrong. Yeah, and that's one example on the physical side. Another example is more on on board level reporting. So I have a TI team I'm coaching, and that builds a quarterly threat landscape. I'm helping them with that. But they build it in a way that it's so smart that people can now actually, out of the whole structure, they can take out what exactly is that they need and have their discussion with their stakeholder. But what happens if that stakeholder then takes that thing out of the context of the threat landscape, put it in their own reporting because it's a good story to tell? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you need that interaction, that constant feedback loop, and saying, hey, my friend, I love that you're doing that. But did you actually make sure that the nuances are correctly? Yeah. So go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I'm just trying to summarize. Like, if I understand correctly, the silo can help a team with focus and ensuring that they actually are able to operate in the manner that they're supposed to operate. But you need that collaboration and you need that feedback loop to ensure that the work is actually the quality that the organization needs.
Yes.
Fair enough.
And the key lesson for everyone is that this does not happen often, and it does not happen specifically. And as much as we love to say we're working together, I still have teams literally sitting next to each other and complaining about the interaction between the team and sitting next to each other.
Or pointing.
That is not a problem. You can work on that because they're sitting next to each other. So that's an easy fix. It's more difficult. How do you do that remotely?
Yeah.
So my advice to people starting and growing in cyber threat intelligence or threat from defense, my advice is not to just purely focus on the technological side, because if you have aptitude to that makes life easier. That makes it easier to understand. But sometimes it's more difficult to learn the more human aspects of this. And that is definitely one of the key lessons I'd like to give your audience.
So I think I actually really like that message that you bring across, because it emphasizes again that even though cybersecurity can be very technical and that is very good if you have a lot of technical understanding necessary even to perform the function, it is still a people-focused job industry. And in order to make sure that actually stuff gets done with our output, regardless if you're a threat hunter, threat intelligence analyst, whatever, you need to be able to communicate and you need to be able to bring your message across to various audiences.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Jennifer. And I like one thing I'd add to that is it's not just about the individual, and that's where the performance teaming comes in. If you ask me, is like as a super talented hacker might be good at some specific task, but if he cannot convey a certain message, then it will fall to the ground. But that person will need, at least in a private sector environment, that person needs to have a bit of coaching perhaps, and then that person could do it. But usually that person cannot change who he is or she is, which is fine, you know. But I think it's the role of of all of you as aspiring leaders to notice that and to see that and see, you know, how does this succeed in my organization? You know, can we still fulfill it with technical conversations, or should we emphasize more on other means? For example, what if somebody else does the technical research and we basically do the briefings? And as a CTI professional or foreign defense professional or even a growing professional, it's quite useful to actually understand what role you're playing in a conversation and play to each other's strengths and also play to each other's weaknesses. And then you can, if you have that open and transparency, that can get you places. Considering
the time, I would also like to highlight some developmental aspects that you can go through if you're either in cyber threat intelligence or just starting out. Personal question: what are, for example, some trainings, and this can be technical, non-technical, that you really would love to focus on right now, for example, to develop your skills further, to professionalize yourself further, etc.?
Key thing is always be curious and always be learning. So to make that is like a hollow word if you don't do it. So let me just explain you how I do it. I mean, I like to be informed, obviously, and how I do that is on the one hand side, I read newspapers, and second, I read not just newspapers, just specific newspapers. But on the second hand side, I also have a specific things I'm tracking in social media dashboards. And that could either be the well-known dashboards, but also some other channels. I've thrown that into like so for example, I'm using Twitter still because it still is a good source. I'm not calling it X, I'm just calling it Twitter as it is. But I'm still using that because I found that regardless of all the moves we saw over the years, I can still load all the data, or at least the data in my dashboard. I have certain tags I then track, and every time I just open the dashboard, I can see, oh, this was the latest thing, and that keeps me informed on those specific topics because I know that people ask me questions about that. Then second, there's also the reports that are coming out. There's many reports coming out each month, and you, Jennifer, probably know that a lot based on some of the projects, side projects you do, which is actually very well appreciated. But that is also, you know, something I personally do, and I do recommend people to actually read through it. But, you know, even so, there's still a lot of work. I just love to do that. I love to read. I also love to listen to podcasts. I do a lot of running, a lot of exercising, and then it's just easy to consume voice-based content. For the starters amongst you, you know, get started with risky business to know about what's up going on. But there's like so much content. But I think an interesting angle is it's not just about the specific trainings. If you Google cyber threat intelligence trainings, there's like 10 of them popping up. But coming back to being naturally curious, it's not just about go to that particular training and then you know it all. No, that's where you're getting started after you get that certification. So what I'd like to think is people who come to me, they are already informed. They have looked up, they have Googled what CTI means to them. They have looked up what it means. They have defined it, at least in their own heads, and then thought about, I think this is a proposition. I think this doesn't make any sense. You know, be opinionated about it. I love that, by the way. And then you start to decompose that. What does that even mean? What does that mean for me? For me, it means certain things, but it could mean for others, it could mean completely different things. And then you can say, okay, I find this topic of what malware reverse engineering pretty interesting. So what is the difference between remote access Trojans and actual ransomware or wipers? How does that work? You know, move on. And the key lesson here is that there's much information, too much information, but if you're starting to learn, then you can also, you know, apply new tactics to your own modus operandi. And this is where, for example, the AI discussion comes in. You know, I'm not sure if some people actually did that, but I'm actually more often than not using some of these large language models to decompress some of the bigger reports, Or for example, what I did in the past was just do a count of certain words and create word clouds. That was also pretty useful already. But that is a way for you to, then you get the next report from a certain instance, which is 900 pages. I'm like, I'm not reading that, dear ChatGPT something, decompress that into like 4 pages, and it works way efficient sometimes. And then what is more interesting is that will make your own workflow more efficient. So not just think about what you want to know, start with that, and then work on how do you want to consume that information. And my key lesson on that is that internal process, that is not often happening. And if you do that, then you'll find the thing that works for you.
So if I may, I actually want to add one key phrase to your statement. You said, be curious, be open to learning, but also be critical then, because that's actually the main message that I hear in your voice right now.
That is, it's good that you picked up on that. I think that is even more important and fundamental to everything we do, and not enough in this day and age. I think that, and yeah, okay, let's not get too philosophical, but I'd like to think that no, but what I'm trying to get at is that this all starts with a critical mindset, an investigative mindset, that you see something, you question something, that you ask questions, that you dare to ask questions. And you know where this starts? In kindergarten.
True.
This starts in kindergarten.
Yeah.
So for example, there's an interesting, there's several interesting articles on how, for example, Finnish schools, how they educate their children or already from kindergarten on how to consume media.
That's
interesting. You might think that is wild. Why do they do that? Yeah, it's because they have a country next to them which is, fully focused on information warfare. Mm-hmm. Sorry about that to be so specific, but that is where it starts. And if you then don't have people who are from a very young age educated on questioning why that simple YouTube video was kind of weird, right? Mm-hmm. We don't see that. For example, in the Netherlands where I live, we don't see that for my kids. And I find that interesting because that is where you should start. And that actually echoes back forward into the current generation of people growing up with technology. And that will continue to go so until we actually start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically they're teaching kids like trust but verify all the information you see.
Yeah. Trust but verify is a good way to capture that, but still keep in mind that that stems from a critical mindset. And I think also it's also about, I wouldn't go back into that, but we also talked about what you don't know, and that you know something you don't know. That is also key and sometimes not forgotten. And if you know that kind of thing, then you can trust it, a certain source, but you can verify it. And what will happen, and that is, for example, what you see happening in Scandinavia, is that some of these they have much less social media issues than you see in the Netherlands, in the US. The kids who really believe that YouTube video that influencer made is actual real life. Case in point, my own daughter, she looks at a YouTube video to become more beautiful, and she thinks that is the truth. So I'm coaching her to be open-minded to videos, to know that what is correct and what not. But I'm coaching her to be critical at what she's seeing, ask questions about it, and then say, well, there's probably certain ways to become beautiful, mm-hmm. but obviously that depends on the other person having an opinion on what is beautiful or not. Yeah. So it's practice what you preach.
I think that's a very good point to stop. Before we're closing off, I do really want to ask you if there's anything else that still pops up in your mind and says, I really want to be shared right now.
I think what we tried to do, and that was also what we talked about in the beginning, what we really want to do is just a bit of a different take on CTI. My take, if you will, but just how do we look at it? How does my team look at it? How do I look at it? What are some of the challenges we faced? What's some kind of advice I would give people starting in the industry? And I think I gave some simple tips on that. And the key takeaway here is be critical, be curious, and that will get you some places. And if you're ambitious and if you want to grow, you will grow. That there's no doubt about that. And the cyber threat intelligence sector is pretty interesting, just as the cyber sector in general. But it is, again, it is nothing different than what we've been doing for many years. And just keep that in mind and just be critical.
Awesome. Thanks, Gert-Jan. Really appreciate you coming here.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
That being said, Dimple, thank you for your first participation in the podcast. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us again today. And if you have any suggestions with regards to topics or things that you want us to discuss, let us know. Thanks all. Have a nice day. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.